Well, I think the pride that I take is that some of the images that I made are going to have an effect for years to come. The photographs of him interacting with people from all different walks of life, different races and different genders, not just white men. I think those images are a powerful testament to the kind of president that Barack Obama was. I hope my images play a small part in the realization for the next generation of this is America. These photographs are America. Hey, Vanity Fair, this is Pete Souza. I was the chief official White House photographer for President Obama and an official White House photographer for President Reagan. This is the timeline of my career. My photography career began at Boston University. In my junior year, I took a photography class in the journalism school. I knew that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I think the first time that I got paid for a photograph was in 1976. We had the tall ships come to Newport, Rhode Island, and my dad took me out in his boat, and I made this photograph that ended up on the cover of Sailing magazine. After I graduated from BU, I wasn't proficient enough to get a photography job at a newspaper, so I worked for my uncle's business for a year, then ended up going to graduate school at Kansas State University. When I left Kansas State, I ended up working at 2 small daily newspapers in Kansas, then went to the Chicago Sun-Times. And while I was at the Chicago Sun-Times, I got a call one day from the White House photo editor asking me to apply for a position in the Reagan White House. And that's how I ended up in the Reagan White House. When I first got to the White House, I was extremely nervous. I was in my 20s. I had never met a president before. And all of a sudden, I'm being ushered into the Oval Office to meet him. And I think for the first 6 months, it was just trying to get over the enormity of being an inside person at the White House. So it took me several months before I felt actually comfortable in the job. On January 20th, 1985, the inauguration fell on a Sunday. They did not have the public swearing in because it was a Sunday. They were going to do it the next day on Monday. But in order for him to be president, because he had just been reelected, he did have to take the oath of office, but he did it at a private event at the White House. And this is the reception afterwards. Nancy is trying to get his attention, and she's tugging on his suit coat. And she's got Elizabeth Taylor in tow. You also see, if you look in the top right-hand corner, Tom Selleck. You know, as I'm looking at this picture, well, I think they were each other's best friend. I think there was a genuine love and respect for each other. It wasn't something that only happened in public. I mean, I saw it all the time in private. I think, you know, it was actually true love. And I think you can sort of see that in this photograph. There were these playful moments. But, you know, Nancy was also looking out for his backside. I think President Reagan had this tendency to think that no one would ever do him wrong. And I think Nancy was much more on alert. Unlike with President Obama, I did not have the same kind of access, so I wasn't always in the room when things were happening. In this particular case, it was January of '86, I think. He was about to give the State of the Union address that night to the joint session of Congress. And I remember I was gathered in the Roosevelt room with all the network anchors because they were going to have a lunch with President Reagan. This is back in the days before cell phones. They were all getting pages about the Challenger explosion. And so I left the Roosevelt room and I ran towards the Oval Office, which was just across the hall. And I remember saying to his secretary, Kathy Osborne, "Where is he?" And she said, "They're in the back watching the little TV." There was a little black and white TV in his dining room. And someone, while I wasn't there, had come in to tell him that the Challenger had exploded. They weren't watching it live. And instead they moved to the dining room to watch a replay of the Challenger. I remember later that day, President Reagan said to me, because I was the only one in the room, something like, you know, "The fellows are telling me I should cancel my State of the Union address," which he ended up doing. And then he gave one of his probably best speeches. It was an address to the nation from the Oval Office about the Challenger explosion. So a lot to unpack on that one photograph. But this is them watching the replay for the first time of the explosion. This sort of skips the first 3 summits between Reagan and Gorbachev. It was kind of up and down, where they'd had a big falling out in Reykjavik in 1986. Gorbachev, who was the head of the Soviet Union, came to D.C. in, I think, 1987. And then in 1988, invited President Reagan to Moscow. And here we are in Red Square. You see the Kremlin in the background. And I remember during this tour, there are these 5 groups of quote-unquote tourists set up in different parts of the square, and Gorbachev would walk Reagan over to each group, and they would ask him these really pointed questions about, human rights in the U.S. and homelessness and things like that. And I remember saying to one of my Secret Service friends at the time, I said, boy, it's really odd that these tourists are being so brazen in the questioning. And the Secret Service agent said to me, these aren't tourists. These are KGB and their families. And I was like, oh, duh. Like, how did I not know that? This would have been January 20th, 1989. George H.W. Bush had just been sworn in as President Reagan's successor. There's this tradition that the Marine One helicopter comes into the east side of the Capitol, and after the new president is sworn in, the outgoing president boards the helicopter and is taken to Joint Base Andrews and gets to use Air Force One last time. So this is us leaving the Capitol right after the swearing-in ceremony, and you see the Capitol building out the window. One of the things about President Reagan was he had this pretty even-keeled disposition. So it was part of the presidency to, as he said, turn the keys over. Now, it helped that his successor was his vice president. So I thought it was a smooth transition for sure. And it wasn't there was like this need for him to hold on to power. I mean, I think probably in some ways he was excited to be going back to California, what he always considered his home. This is January 20th, 2009. 20 years after the previous photograph. The president-elect is at the U.S. Capitol, waiting to get the word to come out to the west front of the Capitol. And he's looking in the mirror to check to see that his flag pin is straight and that his tie is straight. But I think the photograph evokes a different mood. I wouldn't say nervousness, but trepidation maybe, and confidence in some ways. A new generation, being in his 40s, taking over the presidency. So I think a lot is read into this photograph, mood-wise and symbolically. And yet it's a picture of him just looking to see if his tie is straight, essentially. This is inside a big freight elevator at the Washington Convention Center. And we were going from one inaugural ball to another. I think they might have had 3 or 4 balls at the convention center. And it was cold in the elevator, so he took his coat off, put it over Michelle's shoulders, and they're sharing this little private moment. And you can sort of see the staff and the Secret Service trying not to look. The thing that I loved about Michelle is she would sort of needle him in funny ways that I found amusing, and I don't know that President Obama found it amusing. Make fun of him for always having 7 almonds or whatever it was. It was a very genuine relationship, and they loved each other, they respected each other. More so than Nancy Reagan, I think Michelle had her own causes to promote, and she was very involved with military families. I think as we're seeing now, she's such an impressive person. The book that she wrote and the speech that she gave at the recent convention, I think we really saw who she is. So this is Jacob Philadelphia, who was 5 or 6 at the time. His dad worked for the Foreign Service. His father's name was Carlton, as I believe, had worked during the Bush administration, and part of his tenure carried over to the Obama administration. And when he was getting ready to leave, President Obama invited him in with his family for have a picture taken in front of the desk. And Jacob kind of mumbled the question about that his friends had told him that his haircut was just like President Obama's. Upon hearing that, President Obama bent over, Jacob touched his head, not the perfect composition on my part, because it was such a fleeting moment. I have one frame. It happened so quick. One frame of this. But fortunately, I was in a position where you can clearly see Jacob's eyes and you can clearly see his hand touching President Obama's head. And, I think it resonates with people for a couple reasons. One, you've got a 5 or 6 year old African-American kid touching the head of the President of the United States that looks like him. But also, I think it reveals something about President Obama, that at the behest of a young kid, you would go ahead and bend over and let that kid touch your head like that. We were at the UN for the first time in 2009. It would have been September of 2009. He had a break one afternoon, asked if there was a basketball court nearby. There happened to be one across the street from the hotel. So he and Reggie went over there for about an hour to play one-on-one basketball. Now, Reggie Love was his personal aide, was 26, was 6'6", had been the captain of the Duke University basketball team when they won the national championship. Barack Obama was 20 years older, was at least 4 inches shorter, didn't start for his high school basketball team. But Barack Obama is also one of the most competitive people I've ever met. And so, he and Reggie were over there for an hour playing basketball. At one point, President Obama went up and blocked Reggie's shot. And I remember when they finished playing, President Obama, sweat dripping down his face, made a beeline over to me. And he comes up to me and he goes, "Did you get that block?" He just wanted to make sure that I had gotten this picture. I thought it was pretty funny. Put yourself in Reggie's shoes. Reggie is also a very competitive guy, but he also knew I can't give the President of the United States a fat lip. I mean, I can't knock him down and break an arm or twist an ankle so Reggie's in a very difficult position, and being very competitive, because that's just his nature, but also doing it in a way where he's not going to physically hurt the President of the United States. So, I think Reggie probably is somewhat embarrassed that, President Obama blocked his shot. This is the Bin Laden rating. They're in the Situation Room as it happens and monitoring what's taking place on the ground. When we first went into that little room, I had to make a decision on which side to be on. Brigadier General Brad Webb, that you see seated at the head of the table, when he saw President Obama walked in, he stood up to give up that chair. And President Obama said something to him like, "No, you just stay right where you're at." Because General Webb was on a laptop and he was sending messages, communicating somehow with either Bill McRaven, who was running the raid from Afghanistan, or Leon Panetta, the CIA director, who was at CIA headquarters. So I think President Obama said, okay, this guy's got a job to do. I'm just going to pull up a chair next to him. I mean, the thing that's interesting about the photograph is you've got the most powerful people from the executive branch all gathered in this room. And they're essentially powerless in this moment because, they had made their decision to launch this raid. And now it's totally up to those guys on the ground. And so in many ways, they're powerless. We were in this room for about 40 minutes while the raid took place. And it's as tense a situation as I've probably ever been in. And when you talk to people today, Admiral Mullen, Joe Biden, Hillary, they all use the same word. They say it was tense. There was just tension. You could feel it in that room. And I think sort of feel that this photograph conveys that, the tension that everybody was feeling. Because, we didn't know how this was going to turn out. So I sort of see that in all their faces. These sort of slice of life moments, you're in the moment, you're worried about composition and lighting, exposure and focus and all those sorts of technical things. And this was, he had gone to Sasha's school for end of the year celebration. And as he was walking back to the motorcade, there was a daycare center next door, and he saw these little kids on a hot June day hanging out of the window. And of course, they're too young to know who he is, but they saw all this commotion. There's lots of cars and guys in suits, so they're curious just from a little kid standpoint, and they're hanging out the window. And he said, "Oh, I'm gonna go say hi to these kids," and that's how the moment came about. What's interesting is this picture was actually made in 2011. at the end of the year, we included it in our year-end photos, but it didn't really get much attention until post-presidency. I mean, in 2017, former President Obama tweeted this photograph out after the awful events in Charlottesville with a quote from Nelson Mandela about respecting others no matter their color, religion, and so on. That's when it got a lot of attention. It was like the most liked tweet in history, and my photograph was attached to it. So that's, it was 5 years later, or 6 years later, when it really got a lot of attention. It is, by the way, I'm looking at it right now, it's the only photograph of President Obama that I have hanging in my house. He loved little kids, and this kid's name is Nick. He was the son of one of his longtime aides. I mean, when I say longtime, I mean an aide that had worked for him when he was in the state senate, Nate Tameron. And this is his son, and there had been a Halloween celebration for the staffers' kids in the executive office building. President Obama's assistant called Nate and said, "Why don't you bring Nick by to say hi to the president?" And they had a little greet, and as they were about to leave, President Obama's walking back into the Oval Office, and he turns to young Nick and he's like, "Zap me into your web one last time." And that's what's happening here. Now, I got lucky with the mirror, I have to say. I think probably subconsciously I was trying to frame him in the mirror as well. But it's one of those lucky moments that you can't ever expect to happen, and when it does happen, you hope you're ready and you hope you get it in focus and that you've captured the moment. I had gone with him when he was senator, and he visited Nelson Mandela's cell, but his family wasn't with him. And I remember the guy that was leading the tour was somebody that had been in prison with Mandela. And when we came to Mandela's cell, which was locked, he gave President Obama the keys and said, "Go ahead and you can open the cell." And then here we are 7 years later or 6 years later. When we got to the cell second time, when he was president, he handed the keys to Sasha, and he let Sasha open the cell door. And they're inside the cell, and the same tour guide that had showed him the cell before is giving the tour again. The girls are hearing a firsthand story of what it was like to be in prison in this cell. And I sort of love this moment of him just holding Sasha that way. So this was at the 50th anniversary on the March on Selma, when John Lewis was nearly beaten to death. They were up on stage to commemorate the anniversary before later marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which hopefully will be renamed for John Lewis. And John Lewis had just made his remarks, ended his remarks by introducing President Obama. Fortunately, I was in a position down front where I was able to get this hug. To me, it's a symbolic photograph in so many ways, because the guy on the right would probably not be president if not for the actions of John Lewis throughout his career. Shortly after Obama had become U.S. Senator, and the Congressional Black Caucus had a meeting at the White House with President Bush. And at the end of the meeting, the entire caucus came out for a little press conference. There's always these microphones set up, and Senator Obama, being the freshman senator, was way in the back, just didn't feel it was his place to make remarks after that meeting. John Lewis, I think, had just finished speaking at the microphone. He came over, I sort of used the word chastise. It was somewhat in jest, but kind of like imploring the freshman senator, you need to get up to the microphone and say a few words. And I think Senator Obama was at the point where he didn't feel that was his role, that he wanted to leave it to the more seasoned members of the Congressional Black Caucus to take the lead in speaking to the press. It was one of those pictures that I sort of forgot about in so many ways, because maybe it didn't quite mean as much maybe at the time, but now in sort of retrospect, it says so a lot, says so much, I think, about really both of them and their roles in trying to maintain, racial equality. This was such an emotional day because the Supreme Court had made the decision, or issued their decision in the morning. same-sex marriage was now the law of the land. But then we had to fly to Charleston, where he delivered a eulogy for Reverend Pinckney, who was one of the 9 African Americans shot and killed at a church in Charleston, South Carolina. And that was such an emotional service, and President Obama sang Amazing Grace, and it was sad but uplifting. And then we flew back to D.C. It was on a Friday. A young press aide, Jeff Tiller, had come up with the idea to light the White House in rainbow colors. And it turned into this celebration for the staff. And I think it helped that it was a Friday night. I think it helped that it was this gorgeous summer night. As the sky began to get darker, the rainbow colors became brighter. And you see everybody out here, just staff people, just taking it all in. Later that night, unbeknownst to me at the time, but later that night, Michelle and Malia snuck out of the White House without kind of telling the Secret Service, just to have a look, to see it. A story that Michelle recounts in her book. It's also one of the only times that I remember calling my wife, and I said to her, I said, I don't care what you're doing, just get in a taxi and come to the White House, because you got to be here to see this. President Obama had just awarded a series of presidential medals of freedom a few weeks before this. It was very unusual for him to do a single Medal of Freedom ceremony. It was always a group of people every year. And so a few weeks later, I think this was the last week we were at the White House, he engineered a reception for Joe Biden with Biden's family and friends. And so Joe knew that this was a reception to honor him, but that's all he thought it was. I'm getting emotional just saying about it. So as President Obama is saying all these nice things about Joe Biden, he asked the military aide to step forward and read the citation. And if you look at the video, Biden is finally realizing what was about to happen and had to turn away because he started to cry. Well, let's just say the transition was a little different. He wasn't turning the keys over to his vice president or to his former secretary of state. He was turning the keys over to someone that many of us, myself included, didn't think was capable of doing the job. In a different way, for me, it was emotional in that I had spent literally almost like every waking moment of my life for the past 8 years on the job. So I was like worn out, mentally, physically. And so there was this sense of relief that it was over. And yet there was this trepidation about what was in store for the country, because even coming in, I worried whether the new guy was going to be capable of doing the job in an effective way. So that was sort of all swirling in my head. And in terms of photography, I was thinking I had made a picture of President Reagan looking out at the Capitol as we lifted off from the Capitol, and for whatever reason, I couldn't really get a good picture of the Capitol outside the window. And I don't remember when I was on the helicopter with President Reagan that we got this close to the White House as we flew over the White House. Before I could see the White House, President Obama was saying to Michelle, we used to live there. And then all of a sudden it came into view and it was like right there. So compositionally, it really worked out. And I think in many ways, it was probably more symbolic to have the White House out the window. I remember I posted this photograph later that day on my now personal Instagram account. I actually posted it from Air Force One as we were flying to California. I posted it with the caption and it just said farewell. And it's the picture that ends my book, the book I did on his 8 years. I thought it was the appropriate photograph to end the book with. I'm hopeful because of the young generation. I mean, to see the number of people who have been out in the streets, to see the number of women that came out to march the day after the inauguration in 2017, to see the Parkland kids, what they did after the shootings at their school when there was no leadership from President Trump afterwards, that they just took the bull by its horns and led this nationwide protest against gun violence. To see people from all ages coming out to support Black Lives Matter, I think the young people are going to be fired up to vote because they know protesting is not enough, that it has to be protesting and voting, because if you really want to invoke institutional change, you need to elect leaders that are going to help make that change and pass laws that will right some of the wrongs. And it's not just at the level of the presidency, it's at the local level too. And I think young people need to be engaged in local elections and making sure they have the right leaders in their own community. And hopefully we're going to just see this enormous turnout on November 3rd.